Good afternoon and welcome to the November 29th meeting of the Lehigh Valley Airport Authority. If everyone will please stand and face the American flag and pledge the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And hopefully the flag brings us luck today in the World Cup. All right, please call the roll.
Paul Anthony.
Here.
Robert Brooks.
Here.
Frank Facciano.
Here.
Don Gottschall.
Here.
Justin Grimshaw.
Here.
John Hayes.
Here.
Ron Heckman. Larry Hamburger.
Present.
James Irwin. Jeff Maskin.
Here.
Glenn Riedman.
Present.
Mike Stershik.
Here.
Matt Turk. Chris Worley. Tara Zirinsky.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Our next item is public comment. I understand we do have a public comment, and Colin, if you will read the public comment for the board, please.
This is for a public comment portion of the next Board of Governors meeting, November 2022. I watched the committee meetings and the board meetings live every month. I was fortunate enough to sit in on several occasions during the mid-90s. Concerned in the sense that monthly passenger traffic counts keep rising, but no additional airline services being added. Each month I anticipate the announcement of new air service, but all we got was bus service to Philadelphia, Newark. I've heard all the reasons why legacy airlines are not expanding service, but Frontier, Spirit, Bello, Breeze, Sun Country, and Southwest are still expanding their routes. JetBlue is building up their Boston hub for overseas flights and could use ABE to feed those routes, as well as serve the business travel to Boston. Whatever became of the proposed service to Puerto Rico, is that still being pursued? The greater Lehigh Valley is growing economically and population-wise, with a catchment area of over 3 million people and an underserved airport. ABE could easily accommodate additional service. There should be no reason to bus people to other airports with the exception of overseas flights. Other than in the early morning, the terminal is pretty much empty and no airliners at the gates with the exception of Allegiant. Again, everyone knows ABE needs flights to the west without going through Chicago on those cramped and expensive commuter flights. More flights means more parking revenue, and this would make Todd very happy. As I read this, Wilkes-Barre's Grand Airport and Reading Regional Airport are actively pursuing Bello Airlines. Passenger count will surely drop if either airport lands Bello or any other carrier. Bello recently announced service to Binghamton and will open a mini hub in Wilmington, Delaware. Bello mainly goes to Florida, so maybe one or several other carriers can take us west without going through Chicago. There's lots of destinations to be had. Make ABE our first choice, not Newark or Philadelphia. Thank you, Charlie.
Tom, do you?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you, Mr. Smith, for being engaged with the board since, I guess, the mid-90s, as you indicate. I would say certainly air service is a primary focus of what we're looking at for ABE. We continue to talk to all of the carriers that you mentioned, and certainly, you know, there's a lot going on in the industry right now. You pointed out the landline service. I think the key for us, and we've talked about this with the board more recently, is continue to, really support the routes that we have in place here, including the bus routes, which are doing very well. The industry is still recovering from the pandemic. Pilot shortages and aircraft shortages continue to impact service. We don't expect that to really be a different landscape for us next year. But certainly, a lot of good things, and certainly the fact that our passengers are back to pre-pandemic levels, I think is really a good sign, particularly for ABE when you look at a lot of the regional airports across the country. So I think a lot of good things still to come.
Are there any other comments? And there is no other public comment, so we'll move on to approval of the minutes of the October 25th, 2022 meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Move for approval. Second.
Mike, second Frank. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Abstain. Reports of committees. Treasurer's report. Todd?
Good afternoon, everybody. Start out with our treasurer's report. Always start out with these things, and a lot of this for the people that were in the committees is just a condensed version of what we talked about at the committees. But always start out with the traffic. That's what drives the engine. You can see our traffic, the ones in green. That's our best October in a really long time. You can see all of our growth is really driven, our recovery is really driven by Allegiant. You can see that up there. Year-to-date traffic is up 1% versus our benchmark year, which is still 2019. But most of that, 58% of that growth came from Allegiant. So, Allegiant is the one that's 58% higher than it was in 2019. United, pretty close to where it was, but you can see Delta and American still pretty significantly off of it. Always compare ourselves to all airports. You can see throughput, everybody is around that 3.5%, and that's actually passenger flights coming through the checkpoints there, passenger operations. You can see seats are down, and we're down 4.4. That's seats, available seats, and throughput pretty close to what all airports are doing overall. Fast there. Comparing ourselves to our benchmarks, you can see that our peers are down, throughput down 23%, seats are down 20, so compared to them, we're doing quite well. For the month of October, we had a pretty good month. You can see we expected to lose money, and again, that's all based on full staffing, but we had a pretty significant variance to budget, almost $800,000 positive variance, and we did not collect any CARES. We did collect, I shouldn't say, we didn't collect any of our original budgeted CARES, but we did collect some FEMA reimbursements there, $24,000 of funds that we did not have budgeted. That was done by Steve's manager, Jen McGarry. She worked with them to get us an extra $24,000 of CARES reimbursements. So that's why we had $24,000. But we had none budgeted. If you remember, we moved our remaining $1.1 million of CARES that we were going to draw in November and December to next year. So no more officially budgeted, but that was kind of found money right there, which is always a good thing. Revenues are up. And I always say this all the time. Can't cut your way to success. So when revenues are up, that's a good thing. Everybody's happy about that. And you can see where we are year to date, doing quite well. Again, a lot of that's based on the fact that our recovery has come faster than we thought this time last year when we did our budget. We did not expect to recover this fast. So the fact that we recovered faster is kind of what Tom alluded to a little earlier. Has really helped us out as far as revenue. And the fact that we aren't at full staffing has really helped us out on the expense side. This is kind of our budget for, our forecast for the end of the year. You got 2 more months left over. You can see that we're expecting a pretty positive variance. There's some back-end expenses that were budgeted a little earlier in the year that are going to be actually later in the year. And the big number is there are no CARES, 1.1 million and change of CARES that was budgeted. We're not going to get, that was postponed to next year. But still a pretty good number. We're expecting it to be a little less than last year as far as net income without CARES. But overall, all things considered, pretty good. Always break down the personnel and then our other expenses. You can see most of our kind of variance has been driven on the expense side by that personnel cost. Remember this year we had full staffing pretty much January 1st. That was very optimistic because we started this actually in August of 2021 when we said, hey, we want to get ourselves full staffing. We did that the second budget amendment. But again, that's a big part of our variance there. You can see that the non-personnel charges are starting to go up. Really going to see it probably in the next few months with the heating and all those kind of expenses really hitting us hard as we go into the winter months. Cash flow, again, that black line is 60 days after reserves and contingency. We never want to get below that number. And I always talk about the days when we had 3 days cash on hand. Don't want to see that anytime ever while I'm still here. But you can see we're projected to be well above that number. That $69,000 is our budgeted number for next year, so that's a higher number than this year, and we just kind of rolled it out. I think that's it. Any questions?
Any questions for Todd?
I'll stay up here. Frank said I should just stay up here.
Seeing that there are no questions, I have a motion to accept the October 2022 report. Jeff, second. Mr. Brooks, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Finance Committee, Frank.
I'm going to turn it over to Todd regarding the 2023 operating budget.
So our kind of condensed version of the operating budget, we really went into some detail a week ago to talk about some of the stuff on the budget, and we had some really great questions really from everybody, so I really appreciate the fact that people are engaged and really asking some great questions. Because again, this is not just management's budget, this is all of our budget. So it's something that we should really feel good about as we go into, as we start to approve this thing. I have to do something to hit the button, right?
Yeah.
Always start out with, really some basic things there on our vision, financially responsible. And this is stuff that we talked about last month. Again, this is kind of reiterating some of the things that are pretty standard, fiscally responsible, strategic, and really that last one is there's managing expectations. We've had CARES, we have a lot of stuff, and everybody says we want, but we got to manage what we have and make sure everybody understands that we have limited resources and we want to use them wisely. Operating goals, pretty basic here, managing resources, meeting our debt service, continuing, and that number 3 is a really important one for us. Organization, people, infrastructure, they really go together as far as what we want to do. We want to invest in our people, really important for us. Obviously, we got to invest in the business and our infrastructure. I always say to Tom, is our R&D. That's kind of how we're going to be long-term. That's kind of how we're going to take it to the next level, is continuing to invest in infrastructure. And a lot of our challenges have been because we were so far behind because of the WBF, for people that don't remember that. It's taken us a long time to kind of recover from that. So we're doing that. Obviously, all you have to do is look out the window and see some of the things we're investing in on infrastructure. And remain flexible with the CARES. That, if you remember last year, for people that weren't here, one of the things we had in there when we talked about the CARES was, hey, using our CARES until we got back up to, traffic levels before. Now we're there, and we're using that to really help us with a lot of the inflationary costs that weren't anticipated. So that's helping us. But again, at some point, that's going to run out. So we want to make sure we use that strategically. Which is part of the reason. Is that for me? No. That's part of the reason that we push some of that CARES back to next year. CARES and ARPA for next year, what we're going to use in there with all those funds, that's going to make sure we're balanced. Really breaking down all of our debt service. You can see, if you go down to like 2019, 2020, it's that we don't make a ton of money even in our good years. We try to be self-sufficient. So, we're never going to say we're going to $10 million in net income. That's just not going to happen. We're going to make it be self-sufficient, cover what we need to cover, and take care of things. You can see that debt service number there is really something that we focus on with the connector. We started out with the connector. That number went up about $20,000 in additional debt service because of the interest rates going up. So $20,000 per month just in interest charges that went up on the debt service. Obviously, we're hoping to no pandemic stuff and no shutdowns because that could impact things. Everything we flex, kind of our latest estimates, contracts, everything that we have in there, we meet all that stuff. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, that delicate balance between people, operations, infrastructure. And while we try to keep our costs somewhat competitive because we want to make sure people pay for it. We have to talk about FTEs and FTs. Full-time employees, where everybody gets their head around FTEs. We use that because we have so many part-time people. For people that don't speak FTEs, that's 40 hours per week. That could be 2 part-time people working 20 hours, or 1 full-time person, just to kind of put everything on an apples-to-apples basis. So you go down there and you can see, in 193, but we're up to 229, but over here is really where you see it. At 132, basically 30 more full-time employees. And full-time employees even are more costly than 1 full-time equivalent because of the benefits. So that's a big investment that we're making. But you can see our total employees going up. Again, all things considered, we're growing. That means we're moving in the right direction. That's something we should be excited about. Again, breaking down kind of the variance between 2023 and 2022. You can see that number there. That's a huge number, for almost 41 million there. Just for this is the LVIA revenue. That's even without CARES. That's probably the biggest revenue number we've had since I've been here. Even if you take CARES out, you can see much higher than last year's number, $5.7 million. Good stuff, but again, it's still a big reliance there on that CARES stuff. You can see the cost down there, cost of sales. The cost of sales would include fuel, de-icing, and there's labor in there, and labor costs for the FBO and for the airline services. They're part of cost of sales, so they're in that bucket there. Anybody has a question as I'm talking, feel free to chime in. Net revenue, you can see, obviously the net is not as higher because you got to factor out those costs. You can see down there, expenses going up 15%, pretty significant. Again, we have some pretty high staffing levels in there that we're trying to maintain. They come down a little bit from last year, but still pretty high. Down there, operational income, you can see that number's up a little bit from last year. Again, good stuff overall. Then you start getting into net income for the other airports. Paul brought this up at the Finance Committee meeting. You can see that big variance in there at Queen City, and that's really because of the allocations for a lot of the areas, fire, police, admin. All those have to be allocated amongst everywhere. So we have a lot more allocations, and that number has went up significantly for Queen City. Braden, not as much because we've lost some bodies there, so we usually do it based on hours. So, but again, you can see that we have to cover those costs somewhere. Breaking it down, you can see even with that, we're close to $9 million, still a little bit higher than last year. Get down to net income before depreciation. Depreciation is still going up. That's our investment in infrastructure. Again, for people that don't know what net of grants is, see where it says depreciation net of grants? You see, we show that a lot, and that's probably one of the biggest differences between our internal financials and our audit. Our audit says, give me everything that you have depreciated on. So that will, even the stuff you get grants on, it says count the grant income as part of it, and then all your depreciated assets. Internally, we just focus on what we're covering with our operational income. That's that piece that kind of matches year to year. That's probably one of the biggest things. But you can see that net income pretty close to last year. Again, not huge, but again, enough to be self-sufficient. Got to remember, again, that number includes about $4 million of CARES. So, that's something we're keeping our eye on. It is breaking down that revenue usage. Again, where does the money go? Now, that number is a little different because that includes Queen City and Braden's revenue. But you can see that the bulk of it, just like most businesses, goes to employees, salaries and wages, and then benefits. That's pretty much almost half, 48% of that. You can see all other expenses, then the debt service, and then the residual there is whatever's left over. It's not like, when some of these private companies where it goes to stockholders. Whatever's left over that we don't use is used for infrastructure. We just reinvest it in ourselves. So it's not like it goes to anybody's pocket. It's just how we kind of keep going. So whatever's left over, we spend on infrastructure. Any questions on that? Again, this is our cash flow. A little different than what you had on the other sheet that kind of breaks them out by month. This is just by quarter. You can kind of see, what's going on here. Again, maintaining our cash. Nothing overly exciting here. Just kind of reiterating some of the things I've already pointed out. You can see our CARES there, how we're going to draw it out. under line 24 there, Special CARES Act grants. That bond reserve number is going to go up because that's a function of expenses. So as expenses go up, that bond reserve goes up. A lot of our reserves go up as a function of expenses. You can see even that contingency, that's something we established, the board established, I don't know how many years ago, an extra contingency just so everybody could sleep better at night. And that's basically 5% of our expenses there. So again, this is another number. It's not what I would call a real number. It's just a number so that we have some reserves in there. It's not something we actually pay out. It's just some kind of a reserve there. And it's not held anywhere. It's just kind of like, hey, that's just kind of a cushion. And then you can see what happens to that reserve for future full debt service. It goes to nothing in May and August. Then we'll be paying the full amount in that third quarter. You can see the difference in our budgets there between $59,000 and $69,000. A pretty big jump in expenses there from year to year. This is kind of an interesting one that it seemed to be kind of helpful. So you can see what happened. Revenue without CARES, and this is always comparing it to 2019. Revenue was up 32%, which is not a bad number, but expenses are up 45%. So that's not a pace that we can sustain long term. And you can see the biggest portion of that is personnel, and then you can see some of the other things. You can even look down there at like something like utilities, heat, electricity, water is up 65% from when it was in 2019. Some of these other things are, even when you talk about non-personnel cost of sales, that's just fuel, that's, de-icing, materials, all those things cost more money. And the biggest variance for that personnel is, you can see it down at the bottom there. In 2019, we had 38% of our employees were making less than $15 an hour. Now, we have no one that makes below $15 an hour. Again, it's all good stuff that we feel good about. It's just we got to make sure we can pay for this stuff. This is kind of how it's playing out as far as cost mainly for our airlines, as we try to, as we heard that actually person from the outside talking about, how you're going to bring a new service. This is kind of how you would do that, making sure your costs are more attractive. And if you got high costs, even though it doesn't seem like a lot, we could pass it on. The airlines don't get too excited when you raise those costs. They don't like it. But you can see that what we tried to do was kind of keep us as close to where we were for this year. And we're using pretty much all of our CARES, pretty much most of it. You can see that we're using on the landing fee, you can see it over here, that we're using 1.5 million of CARES for the landing fee. So that's CARES funding that we're using to lower their rates, to keep their rates lower. So without those rates, you can see that instead of $4.83, it would go to $6.18. Ouch. But, this is kind of what's going on in the industry. And for us, I think, that person that actually wrote in was really right on top of it. Our airport can support a lot more passengers. And that cost would go down, obviously, if we have a lot more traffic. And we have the capability. That's part of the reason we're doing the connector and a lot of other things, even when we talk about adding more service. If you're not ready to handle it, what's the point? So that's part of the reason we're doing a lot of these things, because cost would be so much better if we didn't have those peaks and valleys that we have right now. So again, there is a long-term plan, and obviously we are on top of it. Again, we want to make sure we're strategic to make sure this business can support itself long-term. You can see what's happening down there on the terminal side, which is always one that we get a lot of pushback on. I mean, a few years back, we changed the way we do our rates and charges, so it's a little bit more equitable for the legacy carriers. They didn't like the way we were doing it before. So, and again, if you think about what we do with the airlines, it's basically cost. So think about if you got 4 people going out for lunch, and one of them says, I only got $10, and the rest of everybody else has got to pick up the tab for that one person, or else otherwise you're washing dishes. That's probably you. You're probably that guy.
Yeah.
Right. You're probably that guy that does that all the time. Yeah. Oh yeah, I left my wallet at home.
I got a quick question for you.
Yes, sir.
In that top one there, I just don't know if I'm following you correctly. I think you said they were using most of the CARES this year, right? So if you're.
Most of the CARES support that we have, and so we have 4.1 million,
Okay.
and we're using most of that in the rate base to support the airlines.
So if that's all chewed up in 2022, what's going to change in 2023 that it's not going to be a huge rate increase on the airlines?
So, a couple of things, a great question. That is a good question. I always like when people ask questions. So the first thing is, you know, we have CARES left over. We were strategic about this. Is the 4 million was this year. We have 6 million, I think. No, we have 3 million after this year.
Okay.
So we got 2 million planned for next year, which is in 2024. Should I say 2024, not next year, but next year's budget beyond this one. And then 2025, $1 million. There is in this number in our rates now about $1 million of demolition. So that's kind of like a one-time cost. So that's not costs you're going to have to carry from year to year. So again, some of that, obviously we're going to have to raise some of these rates. Now, one of the things that we did do, and we changed it a few years ago, made sure we put it in there, was if we don't need it, you don't get it. So like for this year, you know, we put a lot of CARES rates in the original budgeted numbers. But if, you know, traffic's higher, so guess what? You don't need as much of that. That's kind of a max support. So if you don't need it, we're not giving it to you. We're going to keep it to use it for us down the road. So that's really an important thing for us to keep in mind. Like this year, you know, because traffic came back and revenue's up, we're a little better than we thought we would be. There doesn't have to be as much airline support in our original rate base as we had budgeted. Because the biggest cost centers are airfield and terminal. So when we go to the CARES, and again, it's not really revenue, it's cost reduction. So when we reduce the cost, if you think about, hey, what happens if, in the same example I gave you earlier, when you go out and the restaurant says, you know what, we're going to give you half price. Well, that benefits all the other people, right? But if you're counting on that for revenue, that doesn't bring any more money into your pocket. You know what I'm saying? So if we support them, it helps them, not us. Because they're paying less, we get the same amount of money. So by doing that, it kind of gives us more money. And that's kind of what we did this year. That's part of the reason we were able to push back that $1 million. Did I answer your question?
I think so.
You sure?
I don't have a follow-up, so you did good.
Okay, I mean.
Yeah, I'm good for now.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm
No,
out
I mean,
winning.
if I'll talk to you again if I think more.
Okay, no, by all means. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. Any questions? I think that was it.
I still got none, thanks.
Any other questions for Tom?
Glenn, I just had a comment to make. First, I want to commend Todd on the job he did on the budget this year. I think he went through everything in good detail. I know he did at the committee meetings, and a good summary here. Justin, you asked one of the questions that I submitted earlier before the committee meetings as well. We want to make sure that we understand everything moving underneath all of these numbers, because there are a lot of moving parts. I had submitted half a dozen questions to Todd. He answered them as part of the presentation, so I won't go into any detail in that regard. But I did want to commend Todd, Tom, and the team. I think this is a solid budget for 2023, and it keeps us on the path regarding sustained fiscal responsibility that we've been on and we want to continue on, because at the end of the day, we're running a business and we've got to be able to cover our costs. So good use of stimulus money to take care of the old terminal, which has been there for a long time. It does need to come down. So I'm in favor of the budget, and I'll make a motion to approve.
There's a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Yeah, seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Abstained? We have a budget. Approval of the updated Exhibit B for airline rates and charges. I guess that's you again, Todd.
And this is, I mean, I'll go through this relatively quickly. This is just kind of formalizing this exhibit. It's just kind of the same things we talked about. This is just the airline rates and charges. We just do a separate exhibit every time we update the rates and charges. It's reflective of the rates that I already showed in the previous exhibits. But you can see kind of what's going on, what they pay for their costs. That's, for people that don't follow that non-SIG rate is for folks that don't have an agreement. They have to pay 7% more. That's just a choice that they choose. Any questions?
What is an example of a person that doesn't have an agreement or a company?
United doesn't. They chose not to sign the agreement. So they're paying 7% more. That's just a choice they make.
Is there a reason why they would do that?
I don't know, maybe you can answer that question, Darren.
The only reason, they didn't necessarily love the methodology at the end of the day. They had some questions about that, and I think it's a corporate united thing. This is happening, it's happened at a lot of different airports.
Okay.
Like I said, it's just kind of formalizing
Any
what we already know.
questions for Todd on the airline rates and charges? Seeing none, we have a motion for approval. Mike, Jeff, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain. Move on to the next item, approval of the 2023 capital improvement program. Ryan?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. All right, so we'll go through these relatively quickly, but we talked about them at the committee, some of these even last month as well. We kind of went through all the projects, but just kind of a look back, 8-year history and what we spent, kind of as Todd mentioned, investment in infrastructure, kind of our R&D. You kind of see the split with the green on the grants and the blue with our share. Obviously, the more grants we get, the better it is on our cash and the LNAA share. This year, again, similar to last year in terms of the projects, putting contingencies, aligning everything to the cash flow as Todd presented, all the numbers tied together. And then you'll see kind of the overall program that was in the packet, the different exhibits and how they relate to projects for next year, as well as some of the departmental and then the 5-year capital program. So again, as we presented last week, here's the projects that were included. Again, same ones we talked about last month with just the numbers included. Again, with all the FAA state projects. The ones that don't have numbers are ones that we're anticipating later of next year in terms of the grant cycle timing. And then again, including Queen City as well. So you can see the total project cost for next year and then our share at the bottom there. In terms of the major non-grant projects, again, as we talked about last month, all these projects align with our 8-year capital program and the vision that we have for a lot of the upcoming projects. So again, kind of went through those. You'll see the list with the costs there. And again, these are the non-grant funding, so our share is the total project cost. And you'll see, again, some of the phasing as we are, depending on where they are in the design, construction, or engineering component. Again, going through the rest of the Exhibit A, that line 29 is the departmental projects that were included on Exhibit B, which are just some of the more equipment acquisition items that relate to some of the departmental expenses. And then capital leases that are included, and then as we mentioned last week, made a little bit of a shift in terms of showing really the timing as it relates to the cash flow with the grant receipts and the payments as it relates. So you can kind of see that delta there with just the timing of some of these projects that we're finishing this year, but then getting the full reimbursement on next year. And we talked a lot about the connector grant receipts and funding getting back next year for project expenses we paid for this year in 22. And then circling back to Exhibit B, again, just kind of listing some of the numbers of the projects in each of the different categories. But again, we put the categories in there, so depending on how the year is going, in terms of strategizing with cash flow, some of those lower priorities might get pushed to next year or just deferred depending on how things are moving, throughout the year. I believe that's it. Does anyone have any questions?
Questions for Ryan on the operating budget? Seeing none, I'll take a motion for approval of the 2023 capital improvement program. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain. Thank you, Ryan. I guess you will stay up here. We'll go to the business committee. Justin, you want to turn that over to Ryan?
Sure.
First item?
Go ahead, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. So this should be pretty straightforward. Again, talked about it at the committees, but we're looking for approval to accept the bipartisan infrastructure law airport terminal program grant that we were notified that we got awarded back in July. It's a $5 million grant for the connector project. It was a newer program as part of the bill funding. The biggest thing is the federal share is actually 95%, so our share is only 263,000, so it seems like a pretty good deal. Yeah, we actually submitted the official grant application, waiting on the final paperwork, likely gonna see it earlier or later in December. Goes through the same process in terms of signatures, goes to the solicitor, then the executive director, and then everyone gets a copy. So really looking for, based on that resolution, accepting the bill ATP in the amount of $5 million, the terminal connector checkpoint project, designate the executive director, Tom, as the authorized representative to review, approve, fully execute the grant documents together with the solicitor on behalf of the authority.
I'll make that motion.
Any questions? There's a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Seeing none? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda is the approval of the snow removal services contract. That is going to be moved to the executive session. Executive Committee, we have the approval of the First Amendment to the Forks Township Agreement, and Darren will handle that.
Thank you, sir. So we talked about this in committees as well. You may remember we have this agreement with Forks Township for Brayton Air Park that we signed back on April 3rd of 2000. Basically granted us a lease for the turf overrun and had some operational restrictions on the air park. Working with a company currently that would like to consider moving a skydiving operation to Brayton. Good use for the airfield. But in order to allow their aircraft to operate, we need to amend Section 8, Paragraph M of that contract. Currently, you can see there, we restrict the aircraft to 7,500 pounds, 49-foot wingspan, and a 91-knot landing speed. The amendment is basically to follow the FAA advisory circular as far as aircraft approach category and airplane design group. And basically, we're looking to go category A and design group 2. Still limits to less than 91 knots, just basically it increases that wingspan up to 79 feet. And that's really the big change in what it's going to allow. So it does allow some larger aircraft. The aircraft the skydive operation operates are bigger aircraft, but they are made for short fields. They're not faster. They're not super high performance aircraft. So we've had this discussion with Forks Township, been to 3 township supervisor meetings. They did vote to approve the amendment. So if we approve it here, we will work with them to get the actual amendment signed, and then we can continue working with that operator to hopefully bring them to Brayton and increase some activity down there. So happy to answer any questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
With the skydiving element going in over there, do we have any more liability or anything?
No, I mean certainly they're approved. It's an approved aeronautical activity. You know, it's an FAA approved activity. So no more liability on us necessarily with a new operation there.
And just as an FYI, when somebody signs up to skydive, they basically sign their life away.
Yeah.
Exactly. When I die, I'm not going to sue you, nor will anybody that survives me. So
Yeah,
we're pretty much covered.
thanks. Yeah, we'll have any agreements we do with them. We'll have our standard indemnification and everything, and then that we have with anybody else. So the operator of the skydive service will stay on the hook for anything other than not us at the end of the day. And they'll push that off to the skydiver themselves. So.
Any other questions for Darren? Yes, Tara.
Are there any other implications to allowing this besides the skydiving? Like, what else does this accommodate?
Again, it's really, like I said, the approach speed staying at 91 knots really is the limiting factor here now. So you're not going to get higher, super high performance aircraft in there or anything. I mean, it's not going to allow us to land airliners or something like that in there. You know, it's really, there are certainly other aircraft that could land there now. I think when we went through it, there's about 30 additional models of aircraft that can land there. I will tell you, 20 of those I've never heard of. So, so it's, it lists basically aircraft from all over the world, so the chances of that actually happening are probably slim. I don't really see on the operational side practically any change at all from this that you're going to see that we're not doing today, other than potentially the larger aircraft for this kind of operation.
No military implications?
No, not at all.
So this singularly affects just the skydiving for the most part.
I mean, that's what we're going to see. I think practically that's the effect that we'll see. Yeah. I don't think it will be a huge impact to traffic down there or anything. We're going to see a lot of new traffic.
Might get a few more base aircraft,
Yeah, I mean, potentially there could be things that could come in. I mean, some of the smaller aircraft now have a much larger wingspan, technically could not come in there. And they're made for those types of fields. It's just, this is a little bit antiquated the way we have it set up, so.
And Darren, there was no problem when you were at the Forks Supervisors with this issue?
No, we went through, like I said.
From the public in Forks Township?
No, and actually, that's why we did
or
it.
Lafayette College?
That's why we did 3 meetings, because they actually went out and they tried to get public to show up, and we had nobody show up to even comment. So there's really no public opposition to it at all. That we heard, anyhow.
Okay, any other questions for Darren? I'll take a motion for approval of the First Amendment to the Forks Township Agreement.
Make a motion.
Tara, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and we'll go to the Director's Report. Mr. Staff.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Again, as Todd mentioned, a great October, about 9% increase in traffic for us over last October, and about 1% above October of 19, again, going back to 2019 as our benchmark year. As we start to wrap up the year here, it's hard to believe we're almost into December, but we are within sight of our 2019 passenger traffic totals. So we're, I think, going to be very close as we round out the year, which is phenomenal when we look at what's happening across airports throughout the country. Looking forward into next year, into January, our scheduled seats are projected to be up 24% over the January 19 numbers. So you can continue to see that growth as we move into next year, and again, that's all positive signs as we look at air service. October, in addition to passenger traffic, October was actually the highest monthly air cargo on record for the airport. So we had almost 26 million pounds of cargo processed through the facility, and that was up 14% over last October, which was also a very good October. So continuing to see that cargo activity growth. In terms of what was happening since our last meeting on October 25th, on the 26th, our staff participated in Lehigh Valley Academy's Career Fair. So again, working with the local schools, promoting all the different jobs and opportunities there are right here at the airport. November 10th through the remainder of this year, we have Creativettes with a display out at outside our military resource room out in the terminal. And so it's an opportunity where you can actually take a look at some of that display work. There's Creativettes is a company that does a lot of work with veterans, and they have this songwriting campaign that they do with veterans to kind of share their story. Really interesting, and we had that up for Veterans Day, and it was really well received. So we'll continue to have that on display throughout the rest of the year. November 17th, Frank, great job at the annual event for the Chamber.
Right back at you.
Thanks, well done. We did give away 2 round-trip tickets aboard Allegiant on behalf of the authorities, so that was great to do that every year, and great event. November 23rd, Passenger Appreciation Day. We had 17 of our advertisers, some of our partners, like our libraries, our Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton libraries who do our book exchange. So folks were on site here. We had lots of free giveaways and goodies. Passengers loved it. Plenty of snacks and all kinds of healthy stuff right before Thanksgiving. So that was a lot of fun, handing those things out. In terms of upcoming events for December 3rd, which is this Saturday, we have our 6th annual Shop with an Airport Cop. Excited to get that back, and doing that at Target right here down the street at the Airport Shopping Center. So that'll benefit some families here in the Catasauqua Area School District. December 5th through the 26th, you can already see some of the Festival of Trees are up out in the terminal. We're working with 23 of our local schools and other organizations in the community that will come in and decorate those trees, and those will be up through the holidays. December 10th, again, the following weekend is North Pole Flight that we do, and then we're able to bring that back again this year, working with the Pediatric Cancer Foundation of the Greater Lehigh Valley. That's going to benefit 15 families, and United Airlines is the partner on that, so taking these children up on a flight and getting to the North Pole to see Santa is going to be a lot of fun. So it's always a good event. December 12th through the 21st is our holiday concert series. Happy to have that back in its original form. 12 schools, their choral groups, bands, you name it, will be here performing throughout the terminal. Passengers absolutely love it. Staff loves it. I'll have to be, I'll be looking for people every time they play, like, where is so-and-so? And yeah, they're out there listening to whatever band is out playing. So with that being said, December, we do not have any planned committee or board meetings, so I would like to wish everyone a happy holiday. I hope it's a great one. Look forward to seeing everybody for a wonderful 2023. That concludes my report, Mr. Chair. Any questions, be happy to
Any
answer.
questions for the?
You sending a Legion a gift basket?
Absolutely, absolutely. All the carriers get something.
Oh, good.
No.
There should be bigger.
Yeah.
Madam Solicitor, do you have a report?
What was the date on the flight?
The North Pole flight will be December 10th,
Sherman will be here.
and Sherman will be here, okay. Cope Dogs will be in force, so that'll be great.
Madam Solicitor?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Not too much to report this month. My office reviewed a gate management software contract. We're also working on some tax assessment appeals for Lehigh County. That's where vacant land or land that's in use by the airport authority, whether for approach protection or just no other revenue producing activity is occurring there, that it should not be assessed taxes. So some of the times we have to go before the assessment board and actually appeal when there are being taxes assessed. So that's just for an annual appeal, which takes place actually in August, but there's a handful of parcels that we'll be working on those appeals for over the next few months and just getting that sort of out of the way and filed away. Also advised on the Forks Township agreement and what changes needed to be made, if there were any other changes that needed to occur in order to make that change in the agreement happen. Landlord-tenant matters as they arise, nothing really notable in that regard.
Any questions for the solicitor? Any new business for the board? Seeing none, we will now proceed to executive session. Do I have a motion to move to executive session? Have a second? Can't get out of here yet.
The board went into executive session to engage in privileged discussions with counsel regarding threatened legal action. No decision-making, deliberation, or votes occurred during the session.
Okay, and remember, there are no meetings in December. Everybody have a healthy and happy holiday season. We'll see you at the end of January, and I will take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
So moved, and we are adjourned.
All right.
Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. Thank you.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Good holidays, guys. Good holidays.
Couldn't tell.